Hello everybody, I hope you're doing good today. We are actually doing a bit of a different thing in here. I'm taking you to Mina Pepita, which is actually an important place in the area of Solares. It's not far away from Santander itself. This is actually a sort of a little bit of a forest. It used to be a quarry back in the day that has been repurposed by the city hall to actually create a space that is available for walking around, what have you not, but also to tell the story of Cantabrian mythology. And actually here we have one of the most famous characters in the mythology of my people, which is the Ojancano. Ojancanos are very peculiar creatures in Cantabrian mythology. They are kind of like cyclops, which are completely covered in horrible type of hair of a reddish color. They only have one eye, and the only way to defeat them is by pulling the one single white hair in their beard, and that is how you actually defeat them. These are beasts, or I guess creatures, that are supposed to be pretty big, like we're talking of several meters tall, and that live in the wilderness of Cantabria, mostly in the forests and in the mountains. Normally, these are creatures of our mythology that are used to explain the harshness of the landscape, sheep going missing, agricultural catastrophes, so to speak. They are really terrifying, monsters, and people in the villages still believe they exist and can generally cause trouble to their cattle. But sometimes in the legends we hear some other stories. There are a few, not many, stories of Ojancanos that fall in love desperately with some young girls that they find in the fields, some kind of bucolic love story that cannot be. But in the vast majority of cases, Ojancanos represent the evil forces, or one of the many evil and dangerous forces of Cantabrian mythology, not the only ones. But now let's move on to the next creatures that come into our story. You're going to see them hanging up here in a moment. These are Los Caballucos del Diablo, which sort of translates as the little horses of the devil. These are typical of a very specific event in the history and culture of my people, which is La Noche de San Juan, the night of St. John, which is, essentially summer solstice. In Cantabria, we normally light fires at night. It's not just in Cantabria, it's an overall Celtic Germanic tradition. And it is supposed that these, creatures come out at that moment in time, in the middle of the night. It's a total of 7 of them. The one in the middle, the red one, is the leader, and if you encounter them, they're supposed to bring you misfortune. So, as I'm sure you can understand, the burning of the fires and also finding, lucky leaves and other items of protection actually keep them away. It's just a typical story of, spirits that can harm us, and the relationship that still there is in Cantabria to our Celtic past, and I'll talk more about that in a few moments. But you see, we are approaching another very important character of Cantabrian mythology, which is El Musgoso. El Musgoso in this case, which kind of translates as the man covered in moss, is a good creature of mythology in Cantabria. He is a person that helps you if you get lost in the forest. He will help you find your way, and he also takes care of the forest. He makes sure that the woods are healthy, the trees are not being damaged, and overall ensures that the well-being of our environment is protected, which I'm sure you understand for a region like Cantabria, which, as you can see here on the screen, is so full of green, and as perhaps you've seen in some of our other tours, like in La Costa Quebrada or in Peñacabarga, is very important. And this is also part of Celtic culture, right? The north of Spain, Cantabria specifically, has Celtic roots, which are very important for our own development. In Celtic societies, trees are holy. Many of them have holy significance, and that's the reason why taking care of them is incredibly important for us. And this is actually something you guys really need to understand the stories that I'm telling you and why these, mythological creatures exist. Cantabria is an evergreen land. It's always been an evergreen land. We were always very badly communicated with the rest of Spain precisely because of our landscapes, because of the mountains, because Europa and beyond, because of the very powerful coast that we have. And in a way, I think those evocative landscapes are also one of the reasons why our mythology is still very much ingrained in our culture and different from that of the rest of Spain in many ways. But another character is just approaching. Behold, el culebre. This is literally the typical dragon of every single good mythology that prides itself. It's kind of like a mix of a worm and a dragon, to be honest. And if we are to believe the story, it is the mythical dragon of the village of San Vicente de la Barquera, videos of which you have in our channel, that, if we are to believe the story, even the Apostle himself, St. James, Santiago, will defeat in this kind of epic battle when he finds out that there is been some kind of tribute of damsels that has been given by the town of San Vicente to appease the actual beast. Well, perhaps dragons are not so abnormal to find, right, in some of these stories. But these are, I guess, the little bits and pieces that make mythology interesting and peculiar to a place. For us, El Culebre is really something that happens in San Vicente, and it makes sense. This is a village where we have the pilgrimages over to Santiago de Compostela. This is literally the frontier pretty much of Cantabria with the next region of Asturias, where, by the way, El Culebre exists as well under a very similar name, Cuélebre. So again, as you can see, some of these motives repeat themselves because of the struggles of the people. You also need to consider that, the area of San Vicente is an area where we've had a lot of maritime issues, where a lot of people have died at sea, and where there is being constant war. That's the reason why there was a castle in there. So dragons, we find that often in mythology, are not just this creature of imagination. They often embody potential problems of society, potential fears that we had as people. And that is not specific to Celtic peoples, of course. We have them in Greek and ancient mythology, in Norse mythology, in Eastern traditions, although the dragons of Eastern traditions are very different. But as you can see, Cantabria has its own dragon, and therefore El Culebre is something that should be on your radar. Now, one of the reasons why I want to share these stories with you guys is because I grew up with these stories, right? A lot of people don't know, but I actually spent many days, years, summers in the countryside where my great-grandparents had their village. And my grandma actually used to tell me, oh, don't do this, don't do that, because this or that creature may take you away, may hurt you, etc. Well, actually, Cantabrian mythology is a tradition that is slowly being lost by modern generations, and it's something that I have a lot of interest in preserving, because mythology is part of identity, whether it's Cantabrian or otherwise. It's part of our people, it's part of our culture. It's the way we understand the things that matter to us and the way that we communicated with those around us. So this is not just about showing you the beautiful space that is Mina Pepita, which I'm sure you've realized, by the way, is a very evocative, cool and tranquil landscape. This is about helping you engage with a part of culture of a very, different region of Spain, which a lot of people don't always necessarily understand, through the lens of our popular culture that we are unfortunately losing. And here is the next protagonist, El Tentirujo, or another name that we actually give to the same entity in Cantabria is El Trenti. This is one of the many little dwarf, little elves, I guess fairy-like creatures that we have in Cantabrian mythology. In the part that I come from, Trenti is the word that we use more, and some Cantabrian mythology suggests that El Trenti and El Tentirujo are not the same creature, but they actually do something very, very similar, to be honest. These are actually essentially like cheeky gnomes, really. This is the best way I have to describe it. They're cheeky gnomes. They're the kind of creature that you're walking through the forest and like an acorn falls on your head and you hear like a little haha kind of laugh. That is what a Trenti or a Tentirujo is all about. They are kind of disguise themselves in a type of outfit which is covered in leaves, so it helps them camouflage. In the case of El Trenti, it's always green, and El Tentirujo, if you follow traditional iconography, it's always wearing red leaves, and normally uses, the bark of trees to cover themselves. However, we're pretty confident that they are the same version of the same creature, but potentially there could be, I guess, a regionalism to use different words. Cantabria, although very small, and because of our landscape, is a region that is very divisive by districts, particularly by valleys. So perhaps in certain parts of the region, one word was more popular than another to refer to, this kind of gnome that will play tricks on you, and maybe that's where we have this kind of double entendre of the names. Whichever the case, and whichever of these gnomes, we have many in Cantabrian mythology, some of which are good, some of which are not. And this figure that appears in front of you that looks human-like is actually one of the most benevolent creatures that you can find in Cantabria. El Arquetu is literally a sort of helper, a healer, a cleric, whatever you want to call it, who actually helps people with money, right? If you are good and if you've actually done your due diligence and attempt to improve your life, El Arquetu will actually help you out. And you can always identify him because of what he wears. He always wears a white robe with some kind of purple dots, like a pattern, like a polka dot, I guess. No, maybe not like a polka dot, but that kind of pattern. And he always has red hair and a green cross painted in his forehead, which you can actually see in this depiction. However, the Arquetu has a double edge, and I think this is, a corollary to kind of help people understand money. If you are good and show that you can take care of the money and do something good with it, the Arquetu will actually lend it to you. However, if they actually find out that you have malversed that investment, he will actually seek vengeance on you and completely sort of curse you in many ways to become a beggar and spend the rest of your lifetime asking for money to make up for the lack of, I guess, insight and due diligence that you had while spending it. And now another element of mythology which I think we share with perhaps other places in Europe. Los enanucos vigaristas or enanitos del Vígaro, depending on which version of the name you want to use. These are literally little dwarfs that aren't like bigger than your fist. And I'm talking typical dwarf, right, in mythology overall in Europe. They don't have like a specific role or are known for specific things. They're sort of like characters that pop up in the landscape. We believe that they live in either tree trunks. We often find them as well in in abandoned mines, and maybe sometimes even places under the earth. We have found them in like some animal refuges, so to speak, like rabbits, others. So we wonder if perhaps even, and I say we wonder because we don't really have an answer for this even within our mythology, we wonder if perhaps they have some kind of association with, the earth and protecting minerals or exploiting minerals, right, like many other dwarfs in mythology. But the reason why they're called enanucos vigaristas or enanos del Vígaro is because they carry a vígaro. And a vígaro is essentially a type of, musical instrument normally done with the seashell of some kind of animal, and they blow into it and they can perform music that assimilates that of the sound of birds and other, sounds of the landscape in many ways. And as we are walking through here to the next stop, let me tell you a bit more about the origins of Cantabrian mythology. We know this mythology has been more or less the same, at least the core identity of it, since at least prehistoric times. And when I'm talking about prehistoric times, the Celts arrived into the Iberian Peninsula and established themselves in the area of the north of Spain towards sort of the middle point of the Bronze Age, and definitely were widespread by the Iron Age. The first accounts that we have of the Cantabros, which are my people and the ones that created these stories, we think, are already encountered and well settled in the area when the Romans arrived to Spain in the 3rd and 2nd century before Christ, and 100% in contact with them by the 1st century AD. So these are very old stories. Now, I don't suggest or suspect all of the stories are as old as prehistoric times. I think some of them have developed with, more recent generations. Well, when I say with more recent generations, I mean up until proper modernity, because I must insist the rurality of Cantabria is very, very strong. We didn't have our own proper post office until literally the middle of the 19th century. But that's what I mean in terms of, the age of these stories and the way that they have adapted themselves to the traditional lifestyle. And this strange creature that we're leaving behind, that I'll tell you about while we're walking through the rest of the Mina, because you see we need to kind of go backwards to take another trail, is actually one of the most strange stories perhaps that we have in Cantabria. This is El Pecu, or sometimes referred to as Pecu Ave. Ave is the word for bird in Spanish. This is the story, it's the typical story of a divine punishment, right? The background tells us that in the depths of Cantabria there is a family of millers, if I remember correctly, who made money unlawfully by stealing from the peasants, and they have a child who is El Pecu. Now, this is a very bad child. His parents don't do anything to, keep him in rein. He misbehaves in class, causes trouble, is not particularly kind or nice to people. And it seems that it is actually in one of those situations at school that he causes some kind of tantrum, and essentially he gets reprimanded as he's about to go to hit his classmates. Instead, he kind of gets transformed into a bird, or grows wings of a bird, and has to run away to flee to the mountains, right? I know this sounds like a very strange story throughout, but overall it is perceived to be a bad omen. If you encounter the Pecu in Cantabria, it's something that, you don't take it lightly. It's a really bad kind of superstition. And the reason why we call it Pecu is because supposedly the kid was so bad he never properly learned how to speak. The only proper things he could say were the letter P and the letter Q, which in Spanish are P y Q. So Pecu, Pecu. A lot of people confuse it with cuckoo, and maybe that's where it comes from. It's a very peculiar sound that we've given it, mythological, I guess, understanding. But if you hear the Pecu, or if you find it in the forest, you run away. You don't hang around, because normally that means that something bad could happen to you. Because you can actually speak with the Pecu to some extent, since he's, I guess, a human hybrid, or at least has a human origin, one of those situations. Now, since the next character that we have coming up is El Trenti, so the version of the Ñom that we've already spoken about in green instead, and you can see some of his mischievous behavior in here, I'll share with you some more details about general Cantabrian mythology and the cultural aspect of this and why it matters, until we get to our last character, which are las Anjanas. Well, like I said, a lot of our traditions of mythology are being lost. And part of that is because a lot of these stories were actually not written down for a long time. In fact, I believe it wasn't properly until Manuel Llano, a very important storyteller and novelist and general sort of, not necessarily historian, but keeper of the lore of Cantabria in the 19th century, comes through and starts writing down a lot of these stories. And these are some of the earliest written versions that we have of these, tales and of these creatures. A lot of our mythology, like it happens in many other cultures, are oral traditions. And that obviously creates a problem. A region as rural as Cantabria, with an aging population like the vast majority of the Western world, is at risk of losing all of those stories when young people like myself, and particularly younger than myself, because my generation still went to the countryside. You normally went to the village of your, family during the weekends, but it's not necessarily something that is done now. A lot of those younger generations are losing this because those elderly people have no one to tell these stories. And not just that, our villages, our countryside is becoming depopulated through rural exodus. So our traditional way of life is jeopardized, and with that, the stories of our ancestors who make who we are. And finally, the stars of Cantabria. And I say stars because they are the most well-known protective being, the answer to the wrath of the Ojancanos. Las Anjanas. Anjanas are fairies, perhaps quite similar to fairies in other traditions. They tend to be small in stature, about 50 centimeters, but they are shapeshifters, and they will help anyone in need. Normally, they will not act rashly unless you mistreat the forest, in which case, well, punishment is coming your way. We have many different types of anjanas and many different stories for them, but the general idea behind them is that they are protectors of the land and of their people. They have beautiful, long, yellow hair like corn that is a symbol of fertility, of prosperity, and of the wealth that lies in Cantabria, which is its land. And that actually is where our stories for today end, I'm afraid. I hope that you have found this interesting and that you do your own research in the mythology of Cantabria or other people perhaps, and that will inspire you to actually connect with the roots of not just your culture but many others that, because of the pass of time and the way we are approaching our heritage, are being forgotten and lost. Take care of yourselves and have a very lovely rest of your day. Bye bye.